Great. Hi, viewers. Welcome to another episode of the Nana Yaya Boy Show. Today, with me in the studio, I have a beautiful young lady, talented, courageous Sister Akua. She's a woman with ambition, passion, and I'll say a passion to tell her story, which is most important. And her story is very necessary, part of the human story, a story that we often do not pay attention to, or stories that have been relegated to the bottom. And as people of color, or black people across the world, it's important to know our collective stories and how we can navigate and be or become one people. Sister Kriya, welcome to the Nana Yaya Bue Show.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So I know we're chatting a little bit in the background, but the key for our conversation is that you are a descendant, or you are not a descendant, you are part of the Gullah Geechee community in South Carolina, and your history brings you back to the continent. And love to claim you since you are a Kria, and I am, yeah, I would like to claim you as my sister. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
so, uh, so, could you please give us a little background of who you are? What is your beginning story?
So my beginning story, I guess becoming a Kua. I will start there, and then I'll dive into, I
Mhm.
guess, how I started on the path I am on now, with just like being a
Yes.
storyteller and acknowledging my ancestors and this making sure people know who we are and where we came from.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
becoming a Kua, I was not born a Kua. My mom named me Caitlin, because like most black parents in America, we're brainwashed. They're brainwashed into believing that you have to give your child a name that's close to white. We believe
Mhm.
that will save them from racism. But as somebody who's walked with this name, I can tell you it did not save me from racism at all. Because the name isn't the issue; it's the anti-blackness in society. But she's from a
Yes.
different generation, so she named me Caitlin. And I just never felt like a Caitlin growing up. My sister, rest in peace
Mhm.
to her, she didn't even call me Caitlin because she was like, "I'm not calling you that." It's not like a white girl name, and she was right. It was, even though her name it just says white too, but she called me by my middle name, which is Khadija. So she called me Dija.
Khadija. Oh,
hmm
Khadija. Oh, nice, 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 nice. I love that. Khadija. Yes. Great.
Yes, she called me by
Mm-hmm.
my middle name. But it wasn't until I became older, right after I graduated high school, I entered a community college and I just took on all these different African classes because I already knew. I said the school system was not teaching me everything I needed
Yes.
to know. And
Yes.
then I stumbled across this book, written by Sada Shakur, her autobiography,
Oh.
and I would say that really opened my eyes to make me realize everything I was taught was a lie. And so I just
Yes.
started diving deeper because I knew I was a black person in America, but I
Yes.
also knew I was Gullah Geechee, but didn't really know the ins and out of what it meant to be Gullah Geechee because still very
Mm-hmm.
miseducated on what that even meant. And so as
Mm-hmm.
I started reading more about my people and just the practices and how a lot of our culture was created because of our isolation from white American culture that was being
Mm-hmm.
developed. So it was my ancestors holding on to any bits of like African culture that they could hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
So even finding records of how like different naming practices, how they would name their children
Mm-hmm.
Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday
Tuesday.
because they
Yes.
couldn't just outright give them a African name in front of people
Mm-hmm.
who were enslaving them and who didn't want them,
Mm-hmm.
to remember or acknowledge any of their like blackness. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
I decided, you know what, I'm going to rename myself and I want to use it to acknowledge my history, where I come from, and my ancestors. So I decided to just take on the name Akua because it means born on Wednesday, and I was born on Wednesday. So I say, you know what, I'm Akua. So since I've been like 18, 17, 19, I've been going by Akua, and I'm
Yes.
almost 30.
Well, I know a birthday is coming ahead, so shout out happy birthday in advance, Sister Ekua. And
Thank
like
you.
I explained, your name. Akua befits who you are because Akua will never back down. Akua is courageous. Akua is leader. Akua encompasses so much, and I am glad you took that name. You were born on a Wednesday, and you took the name that suits, as they say, your okra, your spirit. That's your soul name, your born day name. So beautiful. So the Gullah Geechee, I don't even remember when I stumbled upon the Gullah Geechee, but being a storyteller, I think for myself, I have been looking for narratives of experience, Black people, in order to bridge the continent and its diaspora. I always tell people that the diasporan African story did not just start at the shores of the continent. It started, for instance, as a family unit, and then through, raiders, yada yada. Families, some ended up in the United States, like the Gullah Geechees. Some ended up in the Jamaicas, or some ended up in the Brazil. So you may get a one family unit with different parts, different father, mother, some children, spread all over, and maybe perhaps a, how do we call it, one family member stuck in, for instance, Ghana or Nigeria. So even though we are all spread apart, we are all coming from one root, one family. So that is how I understand this, and that is why I push for narratives, our narratives as a collective, to bridge the gap of not knowing who the Gullah Geechee people are. It's like not knowing who your other family members are. You see, it's like, oh, you look familiar. Oh, you look like my cousin. It's like, oh, but you guys are related. Distant cousin, perhaps, when you go deep down the roots, you are actually related. So that is my passion and intention for researching. And through that, I came across the Gullah Geechee, and I started searching. And Akua's name popped up. It's like, who is this Akua? Is she Ghanaian? Is she Ghanaian? And it's like, okay, so I went through your page. It's like, no, I gotta talk to her somehow. And that's how I came across you, Sister Kua. Thank you for saying yes.
Yes, thank you for having me. And that's exactly why I do what I do, especially online. Just to also bridge that gap and unite us, because there's a huge thing, even like where I'm from, where people who are Gullah Geechee don't want to identify as it, just because of
Mhm,
years of like miseducation and all this trauma
mhm.
behind it. Even as far as people who may identify as Gullah Geechee, but they're saying, "Oh, but we're not from Africa, we're Indian." I'm like, no, we are from the continent. You can do an ancestry test. I'm pretty sure it's going to tell you you have
Okay.
majority of African bloodline.
And then give us back our jambalaya. That's okay. You can take it all. Give us back the jambalaya. Give us back the jambalaya. The red rice. Give it back. Give it back. That's okay. So, what motivated you to start using social media to, educate many of us? Because some people may start one, two, and then stop, but yours is consistent. That PBS News, NBC News, oh, PBS, NBC News, it's like Yahoo News, any kind of news. I see a quest page.
What motivated me was just seeing how like I can connect with so many different people from around the world,
Mm-hmm.
just by utilizing social media. Like I have a
Mm-hmm.
large presence. I post more on my TikTok, and just in a short amount of
Mm-hmm.
time, I think now I'm at like 60,000. And just
Oh,
by me just posting,
okay.
and every time I post something, it's people from different parts of the world. Like, oh, you
Mm-hmm.
sound like us. Where you from? You sound like
Yes,
you Colombian, or somebody say
yes,
Liberian, and
yes, yes,
so that made me realize like digital storytelling is so
yes,
it's such a powerful tool.
yes.
And also just helping preserve, because it's a lot of people who their parents or grandparents are from like the Gullah Geechee homelands but moved away.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
know for a lot of the elders, they were like beaten inside the school system if they spoke
Mm-hmm.
Gullah Geechee, and so
Mm-hmm.
they transferred that knowledge onto their kids. And so a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people didn't acknowledge it or pass it on. So now I'm getting like the reverse migration, where like a lot of people who may have moved away and wasn't raised in Gullah Geechee culture, but now they're like, hey, I'm coming back. coming back
Oh,
home.
okay.
My
Oh,
great
wow.
grandparents are from here, and I wanted to learn more about me. Like, who am I? And so that's also why I feel like this having it on the online platform is important because there's so many people who are looking for something. So to fill that void, that's why I'm just out here to let y'all know, like, hey, there is a place you can go to. Y'all are welcome here. You know, you are Gullah Geechee. Most of, at least according to like a lot of historians, being that Charleston was the capital of the slave trade, if you shake any like the African American family tree, a Gullah
Mhm.
Geechee person is going to fall out because Charleston was the capital. You know, like he's going to fall out. You know, like they came through these ports. You know, or a port close, but it's definitely within the Gullah Geechee quarter.
Yeah. So the Gullah Geechee, I know a lot of Africans were brought because West Africa was known as the slave coast. From the slave coast, then, places like Ghana became, how do we call it? Gold Coast, and then Ivory Coast. Whatever these people could get out of there became the name of the place rather than the inhabitants of the place. Um, I think what I'm my next question to you is, we were talking about language, and I quite remember that I went to school all in Ghana. They used to beat us if you spoke vernacular, which is your mother tongue or any of the other mother tongues in class. So that is a very colonial system, and that was on the continent. Speak English. And this was something that the colonists were gone, but it was so embedded in the system that we were doing it, repeating the cycle. At present, many people speak English in Ghana that sometimes you meet a kid born in Ghana will tell you, "Oh, I don't speak Tree. I don't understand Tree. I don't speak Ga." It's like, many Ghanaians, my generation, are polyglots because you pick different languages. So it's sad. What is the importance of language for the Gullah Geechee community?
I just want to acknowledge. Oh,
But Sister Kwa, before you answer that question, I want you to go to the history of that language first. Then we'll
okay,
understand.
okay. The history of the language. And I do want to. I don't think I mentioned. In case anybody watching don't know who like what's Gullah Geechee. Gullah Geechee people. We are descendants of. I like to say stolen ones instead of enslaved. Of like stolen Africans. That's literally like what we are from various parts of West and Central Africa.
Hmm.
And it's going into the history. And so Gullah Geechee. I don't. Can you still hear me? There's a plane going over my head. Should I wait? Can you still hear me?
It's okay.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
the history of how the language developed, it developed on plantations here
Hmm.
in on the coastal region of America, especially rice plantations. Most Gullah Geechee people were enslaved on rice plantations, and we
Hmm.
were isolated for a very long time, which
Hmm.
is also why we have a unique African American culture here. And because in other areas they weren't as isolated, they were enslaved, but also working next to maybe like a a European person. Over
Hmm.
here, you just have black people isolated on these plantations because the climate here in Charleston is very
Hmm.
semi-tropical. We barely get snow. It probably snows every 4 or 5 years, if even that. And we have a lot of mosquitoes. And so, like, we were just isolated on the islands. Even the overseers, which is usually a white
Yeah.
man, the overseers were black. I call it brainwashing, but they had a black person that was the overseer. And so, you just had pockets of different black people that belong to different ethnic groups from Africa because they made sure we spoke different languages to like
That is
minimize any
right.
rebellion.
Yes.
I'm sorry, somebody's blasting their music. I hope y'all can still see me. Y'all can still hear me. Um,
I
and
can
so,
hear the music.
so you just had Africans that spoke different languages. Now they're all on this island, but they had to come up with a means to communicate. And so what they did was blend their languages together, which I thought was so smart. That they know, okay, we're going through this. We may come from different, we're different cultures, different ethnic groups. We speak different languages, but we know collectively we are in slavery. We are in chains,
Yes.
and we
Yes.
got to
Yes.
figure out a way to communicate. And it
Yes.
started out really with storytelling but
Yes.
with music, religion, because even though we didn't speak the same language, but we know we had the same rhythm. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
just
Yes.
by doing that over time, it became a Creole, which was Gullah Geechee used to be called Sea Island Creole. What they
Okay.
called it Plantation Creole, then it became Sea Island Creole. And now we have
Hmm.
it called Gullah Geechee. And even before that, from what I read, they said it also came from a West African pidgin, which is why I guess some of us identify the water as Mami Wata, which is just a West African pigeon. That means Mother Ocean. Yes.
That is actually to get to my village, you have to go across the Volta River in Ghana. And when you go, the next two villages, there is a place called Mame Water there. So I am very much aware with Mame Water. But there's a history behind that terminology, Mame Water, which is water goddess. Yes, it's a goddess associated with water. Yeah, yeah. Oh wow. Look at that. I will let you
Oh,
go on. You're making me excited.
no, I'm listen. I'm happy. I'm so happy as well to see like all the connections. I forgot what I was even talking about. Oh, the history of the language.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, that's the gist of how the language was developed. It really was developed out of like isolation. So we
Mm,
didn't have any like while white American culture was developing, we had our own black culture that was developing, which is literally just a mixture of all these different groups of people that like
mhm.
okay, we're gonna have to create a new culture and blend everything that we know
Yeah, yeah,
together because like
yeah.
we don't they don't even know if they were going back home, but some didn't, and
No.
so that's also why I see like the beauty in it because it's like imagine being in that situation, but you're like, hey, we're gonna have to come up with something though because we're gonna have to communicate so we can fight them and get our freedom.
The human spirit and adaptation. Yes. So I was listening to this guy. I don't know how to mention his name. Some Shu or something, something like that. I don't
Yeah,
know.
Cinnamon Shoe. I
Oh,
butcher his name all the time too.
okay. I listen to him speaking it. It's like I can understand that because I speak a little bit of Pidgin English, which Ghana doesn't really have a Creole speaking English. So we call it Pidgin English, but really it's more of a Nigerian, English system. And then Liberia and Sierra Leone, they tend to speak it more than we do in Ghana. So it's like, oh, I understand that. And when I came here and I heard the Jamaican speak and everything, it's like, oh, I, I understand a few of those things, and some of the words sound so like tree, like the Akan language to me. So it was when I really sat down and started deciphering and getting more of the history that I realized, oh, goodness gracious, we have maintained a lot of us without realizing how much we've maintained. And we need to share it across for those on the continent. And this is what I say. Most of the people that watch my show, I realize that are on the continent, Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon, that western part. So, and even within Canada here, they will learn more about the Gullah Geechee, right around the corner, and have more of an idea of it. So, yes, if you speak Patois, she will understand. If you speak Pidgin English, Omo, now she will understand. Aha. Okay. My sister, eh, the Ghana in me is creeping out.
I love it. I love it.
Okay, so we've talked about language. There is this particular part that I would love us to talk about because when I was doing my research, it came to me that a lot of the Gullah Geechee also came particularly from, is it Sierra Leone? A lot of the Gullah Geechee came from Sierra Leone and planted rice. Oh, can you hear me? You're kind of a little lost.
Hello.
Yes, now I can hear you.
Yeah, can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
I was asking is that the background of a lot of the Gullah Geechee came from how do you call it, from Sierra Leone, and they tend to plant rice. Because
Yes.
yes, can you please give us a little backing into that yellow gold?
Yes. So over here they call it Carolina gold rice, but it's actually an African
Mhm.
rice. There's only two species of rice was ever like domesticated. You have the Asian rice,
Mhm.
Oriza sativia and the African rice. I'm probably gonna butcher the name, is Oriza glamoria. And that's the rice that was over here. And there's two
Mhm.
different theories of how the rice came to be about. I tend to take on the African theory, which even some European scholars suggest that theory as well, that you had the African women, when they realized slavery was happening, they would braid different seeds into the hairs of their daughters, their sisters,
Mhm.
their aunts, or whoever, so we can have, a piece of home.
Yeah.
And so that's how the rice got here. The rice, the
Mhm.
okra seeds, which is a huge part of
Mhm.
our culture as well. Um,
Mhm.
they planted that over here, and that just
Mhm.
it took off also while it
Mhm.
was here. And so, like I mentioned, most of the plantations, especially in Charleston, were rice based
Mhm.
plantations. Matter of fact, Charleston built their whole economy off of
Right.
rice. Like I know for me growing up in school, they made it seem like, oh, we just had them picking cotton. Cotton was not like that. It was the thing, but it wasn't the thing making them all
Thing.
their money. It was the
Mhm.
rice that made
Mhm.
a lot of these people rich, to the point that their descendants are still walking around Charleston today, enjoying off of the labor of my ancestors did. But I ain't gonna get to that. But rice, yes, rice is such a huge part of our culture just because of that. A lot of us
Mhm.
came from rice grown regions.
Mhm.
Sierra Leone is one of them, but also just all over West Central Africa,
Mhm.
Nigeria, Angola. This is actually where a lot of linguists believe where the term Gullah may have came from. They
Mm.
think it may have been a butcher of Angola, especially once we got here and the language kind of had to differ.
Yes. Yes.
So they think that may be where Gullah came from, and they think the Geechee may have came from the Kisi people, which is
Mhm.
in West African ethnic group, but it's just theories,
Mhm.
just based on that alone. But rice has been a major tool
Mhm.
for a
Mhm.
lot of people in this particular area and region, just because of, I guess, how resourceful it is. Even now to this day in my community, we eat rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We have a saying that a meal ain't complete without a pot of rice. You gotta have no matter what you make it, make sure you got that pot of rice on the side, or your meal is not considered complete. You need a pot of rice.
Yeah. Beautiful. Since we're talking about rice, then let's go to jambalaya, because the first time I saw jambalaya, I said, "Ah, what kind of jollof have they made?
It was
This
red
is
rice.
what red rice. Yeah, what kind of jollof have these people made? This is not jollof." It's like, and then I saw the name jambalaya. It's like, what is that? But the more I dug, it's like, oh my goodness.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, because the whole West Africa, Ghana jollof, Nigeria jollof, well, Ghana jollof and Nigeria jollof are the jollof ones. I'm not getting into
Yeah.
it. If you go to a Ghanaian home, you eat Ghana jollof, it is the best. If you go to a Nigerian home, you eat Nigerian jollof, it is the best. To each home is the best. The more I went through it, I realized that, oh my goodness, there is so much. Even the food is telling a story.
Yes. Yes, there's so much story packed into the red rice. The red rice, which I consider that's like the ancestral memory, because
Mm,
there was no way for us to like write it down, but it came from the continent,
mhm,
and I just consider that this one of the ancestral memories that we just kept with us. And from
mm,
some of just my history of like researching the like why do we make red rice,
mm,
they was actually calling, because some of the strands of rice, even though now it's like it has the golden hue, but some of it
mhm,
was actually red. So I don't know if that's why they called it that, but for me, just growing up, we all just called it like red rice. And the
mm.
base of it is we use tomatoes. Um, that's what make it red. And it's only
Same
Gullah
thing.
Geechee though. I go like anytime I go like outside of my community, I'm like, man, I want some red rice. And I ask people, they're like, you mean Spanish rice? I'm like, no, red rice.
No.
Red rice. Don't put no food coloring in my red rice. It's tomatoes that make it red.
Yeah. Well, when you come to the west coast of Africa, you are home. It's just, you will come across the name Jollof, but the name Jollof is also, whether it's a corruption of the name Wolof. I call it Wolof Jollof because the Wolof people in Senegal actually, the Wolof people in Senegal are also known as so it's either W or J, the same name. It's either said as a W, Wolof or Jollof. So I automatically thought, ah, probably these ancestors of these people are also the originators of this, rice. So I tend to call it Wolof Jollof. And as the Gullah Geechee will call it, red rice or jambalaya, or whatever we get, we put it in. But the Africans, they love goat meat like crazy.
I love it. African restaurant just opened up. Matter of fact, she's from Senegal, and she has
Oh,
that on there. The jollof, and on the side of it, she like has red rice, so
okay.
people know.
So
And I just love it because it shows the connection. She also has like okra soup, and we eat. What does she call it?
ah
Okra stew. But we
yes,
call it okra soup. But it's the same, same
ah
thing. Tomato base with okra.
yeah. So actually, with the okra stew, there's okra stew and okra soup, depending on how
Okay.
you make it. You can make it as a stew base or as a soup base. That is
Mm.
the Ghanaian aspect. With the Senegalese, I don't know, but we do have okra soup and okra stew. There's slight differences in the making, but they all come out, very, very mm, good,
Yes.
good, 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 beautiful. Oh wow. So, my sister.
Yes. My sister.
Now, what are some of the stories that you've heard passed down? Because for us in West Africa, it's more of Anansi stories, but with a mix of people coming together to make the Gullah Geechee, I'm not sure what has been retained in our storytelling.
So we have a couple different stories. One of it is Brer Rabbit, but now I call him Bubba Rabbit because that's just how we say. But he's kind of like the trickster, so I guess kind of like a Nuncy the spider, but over here it's
No.
a rabbit.
So let me tell you this. So, Brer Rabbit, what I found out is that Jamaica Anansi stories have Brer Rabbit in it. But Ghanaian
Hmm.
Anansi story, we don't have rabbits in it. I don't know about Suriname. So now I'm wondering, where did rabbits come from?
Right. I don't know. I know we have a lot of wild rabbits in, well, at least in South Carolina. So I don't
Yeah.
know if they were just picking something that they seen a lot. I don't know, but we have a lot of
Mhm.
that as one of our stories of, just talking about that symbolized the trickster and how black people had
Yes.
to like use like trick the people who were keeping them in captivity to escape
Hmm.
slavery. We also have a lot of stories about Africans flying away, especially over here, like they
Oh,
flew
the
away
Igbo
and went
landed.
back
Yeah.
home.
Yes.
Yes. And
Yes.
that was
Yes.
adapted into like a story saying we had magical
Yeah.
powers and we flew away and went back home to the continent. We also have certain mermaid stories, which is depending
Mhm.
on who tells it. Some consider the mermaids of like a healing
Yeah.
goddess.
Mhm.
Some consider her as a danger. I see her as both. Just
Mhm.
depends if you piss her off, just like any woman. She can bring danger or she can bring blessings. It just depends.
There's always the yin and the yang. It cannot always be good.
Hmm.
Well, good is good, but there's always that balance, the yin and the yang. That balances. How do you, if you don't upset her, she's not going to. She will nurture you. But it's Mother Nature, really. If
Hmm.
you mess up Mother Nature, well, we pay for the consequences of destroying nature. So that indeed is thin. Beautiful. So, moving forward, what does the future hold for? What do you think the future hold for the Gullah Geechee and for the Gullah Geechee people? Yeah.
To me is reparations. A part of the reason why I even came on this path, especially I hold God and my ancestors to a very high regard in my work. I consider myself spiritual though and not religious. And I say that because when I was 12 years old, I actually entered the foster care system in Charleston, South Carolina. And the first place I landed in was a group home called Jenkins Orphanage. And I discovered that orphanage was founded by Gullah Geechee man in 1891. So
Mm,
just like over 26 years after slavery was so-called abolished.
mm,
And so I felt like that was my ancestors looking out for me before I
yeah.
even knew what an ancestor was. So
Mm,
now it's like a part of my life's work is just telling people about their stories, educating them, because every inch of Charleston was built by Gullah Geechee people. They're influenced by Gullah Geechee people, from the food to the agriculture, the architecture, like every inch of it. And so And one of his missions was to create safe havens for Black children, which children just a Gullah Geechee word that means children, for Black
Mm-hmm.
children in need. And so
Mm-hmm.
now what of my work is to do is create like a community, not just for Black youth, but for people, because a lot of our people are suffering over here,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm at. You know, school just started back, and I'm hearing. I used to be a teacher, but I left. And I'm still hearing like this: the youth are just they're traumatized because they're born into an anti-Black society, and nobody is addressing the mental trauma that came
Mm-hmm.
with slavery. You know, I know
Yeah.
you mentioned about like we talked about how the Jollof, you know, and the Red
Yeah.
Rice, the similarities could be passed on. You know, a lot of our history was oral. We passed it on.
Mm-hmm.
And post-traumatic slave syndrome was coined by a psychiatrist, a doctor. Her name is Dr. Joy DeGruy, and how she expresses it is just like that there is poison within the recipe that we passed on. And so, even though it may taste good, but there's still some kind of poison that came along with it because there was no mental health treatment that our people went to or that was treated when they babies were being snatched away, when they were seeing
Oh,
people killed
absolutely.
constantly. And so, a lot of that, like how we talked about how a lot of my elders expressed they were beaten for speaking Gullah, and how the same thing went on like that, even though the people that kidnapped us may not be in the room, but the imprint that they left on our people is still in the room, you know, and it's still being passed on. So one of the things the future I see is us having our own community. So what we can really start the healing.
Mm-hmm.
And this start with having these conversations, which is why I'm hosting the first hopefully I can still hear somebody with a motorcycle. I'm hosting the first Geeche influence storytelling festival in November. And I'm
Oh.
utilizing that as a tool for healing, and it's to bring people together because the end goal is to create our own community, which they have multiple private islands where I'm from in Charleston,
Mm-hmm.
but it's majority European. You got to have
Mm-hmm.
an X amount of money. You got to have X amount of resources to even get on the island. I'm like, well, we need something like that, especially since a lot of these islands were Gullah Geechee before gentrification happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
the future that I see is like Gullah Geechee people, us building our own community again so we can start the healing process. Because there
Mm-hmm.
just is so much going on. Domestic violence where I'm from is high. Unfortunately, almost like every 6 or 5 hours in America, a Black woman is being killed by their partner. There's a lot of churn. I mentioned I was in foster care, and when I went in, before I went into foster care, I had no idea it was so many Black youth in foster care. When I went in, it was so mmany children in there with me, and they looked like me. And I don't see, like, to me, that should be a state of emergency. 'Cause I'm like, why are there so many of us in the system? And so I went on a little tangent here, but that's like my is what I see the future wise is for us to just have our own community because it's issues all around. The education system is still miseducating Black people. The
Yeah.
hospitals are mistreating people, which is why a lot of, especially my generation, we're turning towards is something called hoodoo medicine within our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Even though people who practice hoodoo, they may not call it that because they think it's voodoo and they think all of it's bad because it's Black spiritual practices. But but
I was about to ask you hoodoo voodoo. Which one is this?
but it's really just the foundation of herbalism. Like I
Yeah.
speak to my elders, they talk about how if they had a cut, their people would put a spider web on it to heal the cut. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they use plants to heal themselves just because
Mm-hmm.
they don't trust the hospital for various reasons, which, you know, I understand. I don't trust the hospital either. And so, but I just see it like we have to create our own in order to really heal. Collective healing just for
Mm-hmm.
us, we have to isolate again to collectively heal. It's the
Yeah.
future I see for us.
Wow, that was deep. My dear, that blew my mind. That was deep, and indeed, a lot of us, even for those coming from how do we call it, the West Coast, many of us have been miseducated. Trust me, we don't know much about the countries we coming from, but we know more about Western countries, United States, Great Britain, France, and all those other places. But the one thing that I've grown to appreciate was that when I stepped foot, when I was 18 years or so, when I stepped foot at this dungeon, I don't call them castles, dungeon, Cape Coast dungeon, my sister, if you could hear voices, you feel presence. It's the human spirit that the energy that was there almost broke me. And I was 18 years then. I'm in my mid 40s now. So go figure. And this has carried with me all throughout. And that is part of my passion for story. And being in North America, being able to have this dialogue with diasporans and learn more about what I don't know. because I wasn't taught, but I started looking and asking and discovering, and I'm getting to know more about my people, not only on the continent but all over. So that hmm, thank you. Don't stop. There is an African I'm going to say an African proverb, because we've all ascribed or take that proverb, that until the lion begins to tell his story, the hunt will forever favor the hunter, because it is the hunter that is going to tell the story of how he hunted the lion. And that is the story of those of us who, our ancestors underwent slavery and or colonialism. We have been defined. And so, listen, I don't understand America, and I'm going to throw in something else. What is this race theory? What is a
A
race
critical race theory, which is
critical
basically
race
just
theory?
real history.
I love critical race theory. There's a tenet in critical race theory, counter storytelling. So everything I do is about counter storytelling. What is the majority story and what is our story? This is us, you and I, telling our stories as Black people across the board. This is our collective story. Now, no Igbo person will tell us saying that this be our story. Oh. This is we saying this is our story.
I love
I,
it. This
I, I put in pidgin English, a little bit of pidgin English.
is I love it. I love it. I love it. And that's actually was one of the highlights on the flyer that I'm for the storytelling festival is before until the African lion tells the tale, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter, because it's so true,
It
especially when
is.
it's talk about like Black history, because that's also why I left the school system. They always tell our story with slavery, and they wonder
Mhm.
why Black children be acting fool up. I'm like, you're telling them that they just came from slaves, like,
Yes,
and that's not our whole story. Like,
yes, it's
that
not.
may be our interaction when y'all brought us
Yes.
here, but that's not the whole story.
Yes, 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 yes. You are very right. So if people are looking to, follow you, listen more to the Gullah Geechee, learn more, where can we find you on social media?
You can find me. I'm on TikTok under Geeche Goddess Akua. If
Mm,
not Akua, definitely just Geeche Goddess. I'm
mm,
on Instagram, Geeche Goddess Akua, and you can follow me on my website, subscribe to the newsletter at geecheinfluence.com. Geeche
mhm,
spelled GeeChee influence.com.
mhm.
I'll be on there. And also the YouTube.
Okay, thank you. Folks, this
Thank
has
you.
been the Nana Yaya Bua show. And trust me, this has been one of the best conversations I've had. And it's very informative, very, very informative. So thank you so much for saying yes. Thank you for sharing your love, your time, and everything about storytelling, telling our own stories, being the architect of our own future, not waiting for anybody to tell our story. Sister Akua, my sister from another mother,
Nice
bless
to
you.
start.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, thank
Oh,
you.